The Sociology of Freedom. Manifesto of the Democratic Civilization. Volume 3. Written by Abdullah Öcalan. The industrialism dimension of modernity and democratic modernity. It is true that our era is unprecedentedly dependent on industry. It cannot be denied that the Industrial Revolution that occurred in the 19th century is the second major social revolution after the Agricultural Revolution. Just as was the case with the accumulation of capital, the assertion that industrialism is an unprecedented aspect of our modernity is an exaggeration. There were several industrial advances in social nature, in particular in Neolithic agricultural society, and later in societies of the civilizational period, although not to the same extent as in the 19th century. Progress is continuous, because all technical developments are in a way industrial achievements. During periods of accelerated development, however, qualitative leaps have taken place. Thousands of inventions can be listed in the field of industry, including the first pottery industries, hand mills, weaving looms, the wheel, the plow, the hammer, the anvil, the axe, the knife, the sword, the mill, papyrus, paper, and various metal tools. Of course, it is nonetheless indisputable that at the beginning of the 19th century, under English leadership, the most significant industrial revolution to date took a huge leap forward. While this is an important feature of modernity, it does not guarantee singularity. It merely describes a difference. We have a different situation in the transition from industry to industrialism. Industrialism expresses the ideological character of industry. The industrialism that developed to the detriment of agriculture and the village, as well as traditional urban crafts, is at the root of all the current diseases of modernity, in particular ecological disasters. There is no doubt that industrialism is the ideology of capital monopolies. At the end of the 18th century, the capitalist monopolies had large sums of money and capital, but had limited ways to use it. The reason they turned to industry was to prevent the fall in their rate of profit and instead further increase it. This is especially true of the textile industry. As mechanical production coincided with new energy sources, a sudden explosion of production maximized the profit rates. The phenomena of nation-states and the fierce competition between them are both related to these new rates of profit. Industrialism outperformed everything else. It became the most sacred doctrine of the nation-state. This race among nation-states continues unabated to this day, and it is generally agreed that the consequences have already reached drastic proportions. Not only ecological destruction in the narrower sense, but also the more profound and comprehensive cultural and physical genocides, and local, regional, and global wars of an unprecedented dimension, as well as the use of ideological and metaphysical methodologies, along with the growing power of the nation-states to increasingly detach society from its moral and political identity. In this sense, society sides are closely connected to the tendency or religion of industrialism. This is why science and technology used by industry have attained a historically incomparable ideological quality. Industrialism, as an unprecedented development of modernity, constitutes the greatest threat society faces and one that lies at its very heart. Industrialism is the essential factor for the constant growth of power, which destroys agrarian village society, leads to the cancerous growth of the city, keeps the society under total surveillance and control, and seeps into all of society's pores without exception. The nation-state, as the fundamental form of industrialism's power and ideological hegemony, plays the leading role in all these processes. Humanity, as a social nature, has long been under the end-of-the-world threat of industrialism as one of the unprecedented developments of modernity. All the catastrophes that have flared up portend the danger to come. In the final analysis, capitalism, with its greed for constant accumulation and permanent growth on the basis of the law of maximum profit, is synonymous with hostility towards society and plays an essential role in this hostility. To continuously impose the law of accumulation on social nature is society-side itself. Material and cultural genocides are the initial steps in this process. Scientists of reason and conscience agree that if measures are not taken, we are on our way to the end of the world. Industrialism, the second unprecedented singularity of modernity, is therefore not simply content by shaping modernity with its Siamese twin capitalism. It also triggers economic crisis through modernity and is the main cause of the cancer eating away at all the vital fabric and elements of society. It's precisely here that the position of democratic modernity in social existence not only becomes clearer, its absolute necessity is obvious. Society shall either continue its gallop toward the end of the world, or embrace democratic modernity and with a push for its reconstruction to stop this headlong plunge. The price of letting things drift is constantly and immeasurably rising every day. These findings do not mean that industry is entirely negative. They draw attention to the disaster of profit-seeking industrialism. As with analytical intelligence, industry used for the benefit of moral and political society could lead to a paradisiacal life. An industrial offensive that goes hand in hand with ecology and agriculture will not only solve the most fundamental economic problems, but could also turn all other side effects of the problems into positives. It isn't hard to see that halting the rampant automobile madness could have revolutionary consequences in many areas, from oil production to transport, and from pollution to human biology. If we look at the acceleration of the industrialization of the seas alone, and the rate at which both the sea and the land are being devastated, we can see how vital it is to have a clear limit on the number of vehicles used for transportation. Of course, this is not the place to discuss at length the results of radical changes that would limit industrialism in countless sectors, from nuclear energy to cultural industrialism. I wanted to take the opportunity to draw attention to the consequences of limiting industrialism. Understanding its revolutionary implications is sufficient to demonstrate the great importance of the subject. Bringing an end to the fixation on the law of profit would require far-reaching social action. Since the main driving force behind democratic modernity is not profit, it gains vital importance as the most appropriate option for civilization. The main concern of the moral and political social system, not based on the system of class, capital, and profit, is to safeguard its own identity and to bring to life the instruments of democratic politics. Liberalism sets the goal of unlimited earnings and the passion for profit before the individual. To do so, it constantly propagates the idea that capitalist and industrialist modernity is the only possible way of life. A bit like the religions of antiquity, it finds it necessary to consecrate its system, so to speak. Cultural industrialism is the new form of this boundless consecration. Economic class struggle, all kinds of power struggle, and ecological and feminist movements will only be able to stop a modernity that has grown so enormous with an alternative modernity. 400 years of capitalist modernity make this clear. We do not need to be great social scientists to understand that the dissolution of real socialism was the result of its inability to develop an alternate modernity. We may well assume that if real socialism had found a solution to the question of industrialism, it could have maintained its superiority. If, in the struggle against the capitalist hegemony, that literally did everything to shape modernity, all of the forces with a real socialist line and all other main opposition groups had to determine at least one main theoretical and practical point of orientation in the struggle for their own modernity, the modernity of today's world would probably look quite different. Their common point of defeat was not asking which modernity, and jointly pursuing a theoretical and practical line in response. They were up to their necks in the way of life that capitalism and industrialism dictated, and did not see any harm in this way of life. Moreover, and most importantly, instead of criticizing state nationalism and aspects of modernity, they accept it as the main form of their way of life. Under these circumstances, it becomes difficult and doubtful for the opposition, particularly left-wing opposition, to present and attain its promise. I am astonished by the slogan, "Another world is possible." The fact that this slogan is presented as if it were an important discovery only reinforces my astonishment. Now that the massive problems of modernity are out in the open, the ship of the system is already sinking and falling apart piece by piece, and even nature is rebelling. Such a slogan, presented like a new discovery, leaves me speechless. Since the problems and madness of the ruling modernity are now perfectly apparent, one should not be content with criticism of modernity's main element, but ask, what alternatives can you come up with and actually build? In the past, religion, philosophy, moral teaching, virtue, and wisdom developed in response to the problems of modernity in their respective eras. Whether or not they were adequate responses is open to discussion. What's important is that there was never a lack of effort in the name of moral and political society. In the light of these experiences, democratic modernity only makes sense if it confronts capitalist modernity with comprehensive analyses and answers to specific problems. Contrary to popular belief, history and the present are not realms absolutely ruled by the forces of civilization, although a mass of propaganda asserts that just to be the case. Just as not all histories written are true, not everything asserted by present-day social sciences about current modernity is accurate. It is mostly the rhetoric of ideological hegemony meant to confuse, dazzle, and establish dogmas. Democratic politics, in the narrow sense, is not only a means of making political society function, it is also the act of explaining historical society in all its aspects. Moral and political society's great decision-making capacity and power to act is only revealed when its efforts to explain capitalist and industrialist modernity through democratic politics unite with truth. Then, and only then, will there be an adequate answer to the question, what kind of modernity and modern life? The last 400 years of experience with capitalist hegemony proves that no other approach is capable of producing adequate and promising responses. Democratic modernity would be a suitable response to this historical experience, both in thought and in practice.